Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here to commemorate and to celebrate the victory of the war against Japanese fascism. Now, we know that the war in the Asian Pacific region against the Japanese fascism was a very important part of the victory against global fascism, mainly German Nazism in Europe as well as Japanese fascism here in the Asian Pacific region. Now, for the Americans and for most of the people in the world, in the West in particular, they think about the war against Japanese fascism as a war of less than 4 years after the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. But for the Chinese nation, the war of resistance against Japanese aggression was a war of 14 years, starting from 1931 all the way to the victory in August 1945. For 10 years, China stood by itself, fighting more or less alone against the onslaught of the Japanese aggressors. In 1931, the Japanese aggressors occupied China's northeast, and then they gradually expanded their aggression into many parts of China. At the height of the Japanese occupation of China, they occupied up to about half of the landmass of China, and they managed to close off almost all the coastline of China. Altogether, China sacrificed the greatest amount. More than 30 million of my countrymen lost their lives, either killed in battle or they became civilian casualties of the war. And one thing I hope mankind will always remember is that the Chinese nation refused to surrender. We promised that the nation as a whole should be united and keep on fighting against the aggressors from Japan. The miracle came when the United States also declared war on Japan after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Ever since the American joining this war of fighting against Japanese aggressors, this development is of contemporary importance too when we look back. That is, China and the United States became allies. We really stood shoulder to shoulder. We joined in all the military actions together. And together with other allies, we defeated Japanese fascism. I think China really made the greatest contribution, not only in terms of the more than 30 million casualties that we suffered as a nation, not only for 14 years in a row, we never hesitated, and the Chinese nation as a whole wanted to be united, regardless of our party affiliations, regardless of our social status. All of us as a nation should be united together in this fight against Japanese aggressors. People may say, yes, the United States probably also played a very important role. Yes, I don't disagree. But with or without the United States joining the war in 1941, the Chinese nation will continue to fight against the Japanese aggressors until we expel all of them out of China, until we achieve the real independence of China by expelling the Japanese aggressors. Now, what are the lessons when we look back 80 years later, 80 years after the unconditional surrender of Japan? I think there are several things. One is that I believe we still live in the international order which was established in 1945 upon the ashes of the Second World War, based upon the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany in Europe and the Japanese fascism in the Asian Pacific region. The order established in 1945 was not a unipolar world. It was meant to be a multipolar world to start with. And China was the first nation to sign the United Nations Charter, and China from the very beginning became a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. So the first lesson we need to learn and keep in mind is that all the countries in the world, about 200 of us, need to rally around the United Nations and move forward together as mankind, regardless of our differences, and really focus on what matters the most. What matters the most for the people of today? Several things. One is to embrace peace. Secondly, to fight against wars of all kinds. Mankind does not need war. After the First World War, after the Second World War, we know the scourge, the calamities of war of all kinds for mankind. So, maintaining peace and unite against war of all kinds and focus on development. I would say people of all countries, mankind as a whole, need to improve their living standards. We need to really be friends with each other rather than view each other in hostile terms, try to destroy each other, for example, try to second guess each other and try to get to each other's jugular. That's not going to build a better world for tomorrow. That will be really the calamity for mankind's future. Now, the second thing, if I zoom in onto this part of the world, I would urge the Japanese nation and the Japanese government to really treasure the pacifist constitution of Japan. Japan, after its unconditional surrender in 1945, has lost any justification to rearm and to become militaristic again in this part of the world, either against China or against other countries in our region. Japan should really focus on peace and development and friendly relations with the rest of the world. Allow me to emphasize one thing. It is against the Japanese constitution if the Japanese government wants to move their military forces outside of Japan to other part of the world or any part of the world to constitute another military threat against other countries. This is very important. I think if we can permanently get rid of this Japanese fascism, whatever that remains of it, in whatever shapes and forms, I think East Asia as a whole and Asia-Pacific region as a whole will be a free region. All of us will benefit, including the Japanese people. That's the other thing. Now, the most important thing, allow me to emphasize, is peace between China and the United States. I've come up with my own theory. It's called inevitability of peace between China and the United States, which is a kind of rebuke of the so-called destined for war scenario for China and the United States. Why? Because when we look back upon the Second World War, when we look around the world of today, one thing is for sure. War is not an option and should never be an option for China and the United States. A war between China and the United States will be a global calamity. It will be, more or less, the Armageddon for mankind. So we need to promote peace between China and the United States, and we need to really urge those decision makers in Washington, don't view China as an enemy. China is not America's enemy. We were allies before in the Second World War in our joint efforts, which resulted in the unconditional surrender of the Japanese fascism. We can work together as partners going forward, and I hope all of us will believe in the inevitability of peace. Peace is the most important thing for China and for the United States, and peace is the only thing that really matters for mankind. Therefore, when we are gathered here, we are not only looking back, we are looking at the world today, but more importantly, we are looking forward into the future. A future of the world for our posterity, for our children, for our grandchildren. Then looking forward, how far do you want to look forward? In Chinese terms, we look forward minimum for the coming 5,000 years. I hope when we look forward into the coming 5,000 years, there'll be no war. There'll be no global war. And I see mankind in the coming 5,000 years in perpetual and eternal peace with each other. We are all brothers and sisters. No one should divide us. No one should plunge us in war, as mankind suffered in the Second World War. Thank you very much.